This final video in the sequence addresses a question that surprises many readers of Paul once they notice it. Paul regularly tells Christians to obey Christ. He urges obedience in many places. And yet, strikingly, Paul never tells the church to obey Christ. Instead, Paul speaks of the church as being subject to Christ. That difference is not accidental. It is theologically deliberate. So in this video, we are going to slow down and ask a focused question. Why does Paul tell Christians to obey Christ, but never tells the church to obey Christ? To answer this, we need to pay attention to how Paul thinks about persons, bodies, and relationships. Let's begin with the language Paul uses. When Paul addresses individual believers, he speaks in terms of action. Walk in obedience. Live obediently. Obey from the heart. These are imperatives. They are commands directed to persons as moral agents. But when Paul speaks about the church, he shifts his language. The church is described as Christ's body. Christ is described as the head of the body. This imagery matters. Bodies do not obey heads. Bodies live from heads. A head does not issue commands to a body as an external authority. A head gives life, direction, and coordination to a body from within the same living organism. This is why Paul does not say, "The church obeys Christ." He says, "The church is subject to Christ." Subjecthood describes relational position, not discrete action. The church does not stand alongside Christ as a separate agent, who then chooses whether or not to comply. The church exists from Christ. The church lives from Christ. The church receives its life, its identity, and its direction from Christ. This is a fundamentally different way of understanding obedience. Christ acts. The church lives from Christ's action. Christ gives himself. The church is sustained by that gift. This also explains why Paul uses head-body language rather than ruler-subject language. If Paul were thinking in terms of power, he would use political categories. But he does not. Instead, he uses organic categories, relational categories, ontological categories. The church is not ruled by Christ from the outside. The church is animated by Christ from within. This does not eliminate obedience, but it relocates it. Individual Christians obey Christ as those who live within Christ's body. Their obedience is derivative, responsive, and participatory. The church as a whole, however, is not an external object of command. It is Christ's own body, brought into being by his action. This is why Paul can speak of the church as holy, as beloved, as radiant, without grounding those descriptions in the church's performance. The church is what it is because of Christ. Once this distinction is seen, Paul's ecclesiology becomes coherent. The church is not coerced, it is constituted. The church is not managed, it is enlivened. The church is not commanded from without, it is sustained from within. This also helps us see why Paul's vision of authority is so different from modern assumptions. Christ does not relate to the church as a commander relates to subordinates. He relates to the church as a head relates to a body. And that relationship is fundamentally life-giving. So the key point of this video is this: Paul tells Christians to obey Christ because Christians act. Paul tells the church to be subject to Christ because the church lives. Once this distinction is grasped, Paul's theology of Christ and the church becomes coherent, non-coercive, and deeply relational. And this brings us full circle from Genesis to Christ to the church. Paul is working with a consistent relational vision. Order without hierarchy, action without domination, submission without coercion, life received, not seized. In the next phase of this project, we'll begin drawing these threads together into a comprehensive picture of Paul's relational theology as a whole. Thank you for watching.